Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was born in India in 1869. He became one of his country's leaders. Life was difficult when he was young. He got married at the age of 13, a common custom in India at that time. He studied law at the university. He went to London and became a lawyer. Then he returned to his country. A few years later, he went to work in South Africa. He organized demonstrations and they sent him to prison several times. 20 years later, he returned to India. There, he worked hard to help the poor. He played a very important role in the independence of India. A fanatic killed him in 1948. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was born in London in 1889. He first appeared in music halls and then acted on the London stage. In 1910, he went to the USA with Fred Carnot's company, but he didn't stay with Carnot very long. In 1913, he started to work at the Keystone Company in Hollywood. There he made his first film, Making a Living, in 1914. In his second film, Kid Auto Races at Venice, 1914, he introduced the Little Tramp. This character made him famous. Chaplin got married several times. He met his last wife, Una O'Neill, in 1942 and married her a year later. Chaplin was then 54 years old and Una 18. He left the USA in 1952 for political reasons and lived with his family in Switzerland for the rest of his life. He died in 1977. William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was born in Stratford on April 23, 1564. His father, John Shakespeare, was an important man in the town. William did not come from a poor family. When he was 18, William married Anne Hathaway in Stratford. But he didn't want to stay there. He wanted to be an actor and the best theaters were in London. So, in 1587, William went to London, where he worked as an actor in a theater called the Rose. He began to write plays for the actors. He wrote Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, Richard II, Antony and Cleopatra, and many more. Everyone liked his plays, and he became famous. When James I became king in 1603, Shakespeare worked for him and performed his plays for the king and his friends. He also worked at the famous Globe Theatre. This theater presented his last play, Henry VIII. There was a gun in this play, and fire from the gun burned the theater down. In 1610, Shakespeare went back to Stratford. He wanted to live there with his family, but he died on April 23, 1610. He was only 46 years old. Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was born on February 7, 1812 in Portsmouth on the southern coast of England. He was the son of a poor family. Because they were poor, they moved to Camden Town, a neighborhood of London. At the age of 12, Charles started to work in a warehouse. He met people from the working class there. A few months later, he was apart from his family. This experience was the most event in his life. He described these hardships in his novels. Gianni Versace. Gianni Versace is a famous Italian fashion designer. Versace worked for several Italian designers before opening his own studio with his brother Santo and sister Donatella. He became famous for designing beautiful clothes in extreme colors and patterns. His fashion business covered men's, women's and children's clothing, accessories, jewelry, perfume, and housewares. Versace got ideas from street life, art, and films. Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born in London on August 13, 1899. He went to school and university there, and in 1920 he started to work with a British film company. In 1920 he also married Alma Revell, his wife for the next 60 years. They had one daughter. From 1925 to 1939 he made several films in Britain, including The 39 Steps and The Man Who Knew Too Much. In 1939 he left Britain because he wanted to work in Hollywood. He lived in Los Angeles for the rest of his life and made many of his 53 films there. A lot of people in America and Europe saw his famous films Psycho, 1960, and The Birds, 1963. Queen Elizabeth II made Hitchcock, Sir Alfred, in 1980. Soon after that, in May 1980, he died in Los Angeles. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in East Tupelo, Mississippi. His twin brother died at birth. Elvis grew up in a poor home, but his parents, Vernon and Gladys Presley, were kind and loving. After he left school, Elvis worked in different jobs. He worked in cinemas and supermarkets, and he worked as a lorry driver. This was the job he liked most. Two people helped Elvis in his career. One was Sam Phillips. Sam had a record company called Sun Records. He was the first person to realize that Elvis was a good singer. The second person to help Elvis was Tom Parker. Tom became Elvis' manager in 1955, and he made him into a famous rock and roll star. Elvis won a lot of gold discs in his life. He died on August 16, 1977. Many people say that he died because he took too many drugs and pills. Gregory Mendel. An Augustinian monk named Gregory Mendel was the first person to make precise observations about the biological mechanism of inheritance. This happened over 100 years ago in an Austrian monastery, where Mendel spent his leisure hours performing experiments with pea plants of different types. He crossed them carefully and took notes about the appearance of various traits or characteristics in succeeding generations. From his observations, Mendel formed a set of rules, now known as the Mendelian laws of inheritance, which were found to apply not only to plants but to animals and human beings as well. This was the beginning of the modern science of genetics. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, born on May 29, 1917, was the 35th President of the United States, serving from January 1961 until he was assassinated in November 1963. At the age of 43, he was the youngest to have been elected to the office, the second youngest president, after Theodore Roosevelt, the first person born in the 20th century to serve as president. To date, Kennedy has been the only Catholic president and the only president to have won a Pulitzer Prize. Events during his presidency included the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the space race, by initiating Project Apollo, which would culminate in the moon landing, the building of the Berlin Wall, the African American Civil Rights Movement, and increased U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald was accused of the crime and arrested that evening, but Jack Ruby shot and killed him 2 days later, before a trial could take place. The FBI and the Warren Commission officially concluded that Oswald was the lone assassin. However, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, concluded that those investigations were flawed and that Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy. Since the 1960s, information concerning Kennedy's private life has come to light. Details of Kennedy's health problems with which he struggled have become better known, especially since the 1990s. Although initially kept secret from the general public, Reports of Kennedy being unfaithful in marriage have garnered much press. Kennedy ranks highly in public opinion ratings of U.S. presidents. Rudyard Kipling. The story writer Rudyard Kipling was the son of an Englishman. Kipling was born on December 30, 1865 in Bombay, India. When he was 5 years old, his father sent him to England. There he went to school at the United Services College in Devon. He wrote about this school later in his life in his book called Stocky & Co. He finished school when he was 17 and returned to India. There, he worked as a reporter and wrote many books. His stories, especially those about soldiers, were very popular and he became very famous at the age of 25. He traveled to India, China, Japan and America and finally went to England. There, he worked on stories of India and wrote a book called Barrack Room Ballads. In 1892, Kipling married an American, Caroline Balstier. For some time they lived in Vermont in the United States but later returned to Sussex, England. Kipling wrote books for readers of all ages. He also wrote children's stories. Some of them are The Jungle Book, 1894, The Second Jungle Book, 1895, and Just So Stories, 1902. He received the 1907 Nobel Prize for Literature. John Lennon. A lot of people remember John Lennon for his music with the Beatles. He was serious and creative, and many young people of the 1960s and 1970s thought he spoke for them. Lennon was born on October 9, 1940, in Liverpool, England. When he was a child, he listened to the music of rock and roll singers like Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard. At 15, when he was in art school, Lennon started his first rock group, the Quarrymen. The members of the group were Paul McCartney, George Harrison and Pete Best, who played the drums. The Quarrymen later changed their name to the Silver Beatles and then the Beatles. When Pete Best left the group, Ringo Starr joined the Beatles as the drummer. Between 1958 and 1962, the group played in nightclubs in Liverpool and Hamburg, Germany. Then the Beatles made a record called I Wanna Hold Your Hand, and had their first big success in Britain. Please Please Me came a short time after that and it became number one. Lennon was both a singer and a songwriter. He wrote many of the Beatles' songs and most of these songs became number one all over the world. They were romantic and intelligent, and today's musicians still play them. Lennon did not only make music and films with the Beatles. He also wrote 2 books, the first one in 1964 and the second one a year after that. In 1967, he acted in a film called How I Won the War. On December 8, 1980, John Lennon died in New York, shot dead outside his apartment building. Every year, thousands of people come together in New York's Central Park to remember him. For many people in the world, he was someone very special. The worlds of Walt Disney. Disneyland and Disney World are the 2 most famous entertainment parks in the world. Disneyland is in California and Disney World is in Florida, USA. These were built by Walt Disney. Walt Disney started to make cartoon films in 1923 with his brother Roy. First he made Alice in Wonderland and then, in 1928, Mickey Mouse was created. He was very interested in technology, so all his work was technically excellent and very enjoyable. He believed in providing good, clean entertainment and fun for all the family. He wanted a world which would give him a lot of fun when he was a boy, and so he built it for others to enjoy in Disneyland, which was opened in Anaheim, California in 1955. It has 4 parts: Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. In 1960, Walt Disney bought a big piece of land near Florida and started to build his second great entertainment park. This was called Disney World. It was finished in 1971 and cost $400 million. This place is a little different from Disneyland. It has got hotels and shopping centers as well as entertainment places. So people can eat, sleep, and enjoy doing things in the same place. A few years ago, 2 other small cities were planned near Disney World. One of them is called Lake Buena Vista. This has been completed and people have started to move in. They are still building IHE's second city, so people will not move in until 1995. Walt Disney died of cancer in 1966, but people still remember him when they visit his parks today. James Dean. James Dean, the famous American actor, was not very tall, less than medium height, and had thick fair hair and intense blue eyes. He was short-sighted, he couldn't really see anything without his glasses. James came to Hollywood when he was 18, hoping to get into films. At first, he was not at all successful, and for a time he had to live on very little money. There were days when he only ate cereals, which he sometimes mixed with marmalade. Then he went to New York, the center of live theater in the United States. He got a part in a play and was seen by the great director, Elia Kazan. Kazan was planning the film East of Eden and realized Dean would be perfect for one of the main parts. Dean was difficult to work with. He was also an eccentric person. He always wore the same overcoat and jeans, rarely shaved, and had only 1 or 2 friends. He sometimes didn't talk to anybody for days. When he went to parties, he often brought his bongo drums with him. Then he sat in a corner, took off his glasses because he didn't want to see anybody, and played the drums all night without saying a word. He went back to Hollywood to make East of Eden and then made 2 more films, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant. His co-star in the last film, Rock Hudson, later said, "I didn't like Dean particularly. I didn't like working with him, either. He was hard to be with. He was always angry and he never smiled. Although he had poor eyesight, he loved riding on fast motorbikes and driving even faster sports cars." A few days after he finished Giant, on the 25th of September 1955, Dean went for a drive in his new Porsche. The sun was going down, so the light was poor. And unfortunately, Dean was not wearing his glasses. Suddenly, he saw a car in front of him. It was slowing down to turn into a side road. Dean tried to slow down, too, but it was too late. He hit the car at high speed and was killed immediately. 2 German girls killed themselves when they heard the news because they believed it was impossible to live without him. A few years later, a New York shopgirl wrote a book called Jimmy Dean Returns, in which she wrote that she was communicating with Dean from the other world. 500,000 copies of the book were sold. It was only the beginning of a strange legend that goes on, even today. Alexander the Great. In 334 BC, with an army of 35,000 men, Alexander crossed into Asia Minor. In addition to soldiers, the former student of Aristotle brought along scientists to study plant and animal life and to chart the terrain. After capturing the coast of Asia Minor, Alexander marched into Syria and defeated the Persian army at the Battle of Issus. Rather than pursuing the fleeing Persian king, Darius III, Alexander stayed with his master plan, which included the capture of coastal ports in order to crush the Persian navy. He captured Tyre, thought to be an impregnable city, and advanced into Egypt. Grateful to Alexander for having liberated them from Persian rule, the Egyptians made him pharaoh. Alexander appointed officials to administer the country and founded a new city, Alexandria. Having destroyed or captured the Persian fleet, Alexander moved into Mesopotamia in pursuit of Darius in 331 BC. The Macedonians defeated the numerically superior Persians at Gaugamela, just east of the Tigris River, but Darius escaped. After stopovers at Babylon and at Persepolis, which he burned in revenge for Xerxes' destruction of Athens more than 150 years earlier, Alexander resumed the chase. When he finally caught up with Darius, the Persian king was already dead, killed by Persian conspirators. Alexander relentlessly pushed deeper into Asia, crossing from Afghanistan into North India, where he defeated the king of Pontus in a costly battle. When Alexander announced plans to push deeper into India, his troops, exhausted and far from home in a strange land, resisted. Yielding to their wishes, Alexander returned to Babylon in 324 BC. In these campaigns, Alexander proved himself to be a superb strategist and leader of men. Winning every battle, Alexander's army had carved an empire that stretched from Greece to India. Future conquerors, including Caesar and Napoleon, would read of Alexander's career with fascination and longing. Martha Graham. The name Martha Graham is practically a synonym for the still young art form known as modern dance, which dates from her pioneering days in the late 1920s. Often seen as a rebellion against the 350-year-old tradition of classical ballet, modern dance is the world's first lasting alternative to that tradition. Graham has been rightly called a genius and one of the greatest artists the United States has ever produced. Yet, as she is now over 90 years old, many people have wondered whether her legend will survive. This question is more to the point because change has certainly been a major factor in Graham's career. In the early 1920s, Graham came to feel that the radical changes brought by World War I required a new and different style of dancing. After attending a famous dance school in California called Denishon, she and two other dancers made a dramatic breakaway from the Denishon Dance Company. In 1927, a reporter for the New York Times coined the term modern dance to describe their new and innovative style. Graham's early dances of the 1930s were stark and simple. These contrast with the poetic theater pieces of the 1940s and even more sharply with the complex dance dramas based on Greek mythology that characterized the 1950s and 1960s. In these, several performers would each portray different aspects of the same character's personality. Often, scenes from the past, present, and future would occur at the same time, making it impossible to distinguish clearly one period of time from another. Even the dancers themselves don't look the same as they once did. The full-bodied dancers of the past, whose weight gave them a certain power, have been replaced by thinner dancers with a lighter style. In Graham's view, these younger dancers are the product of diets and vitamins, but by using them, she has kept pace with the changing times. The absolute thing is now, she says, change is the only constant. Not surprisingly, Graham's changes of direction have caused controversy, and some of her most devoted admirers have been upset by her new work that does not fit their memories of her past. She protested strongly when, in 1984, an application for grant money was refused by a foundation that felt the artistic standards of her company were not what they used to be. Yet, despite the changes and controversy, one of Graham's beliefs has remained fixed over the years: that dance expresses emotion we often try to hide and cannot express in words. "I don't want to be understandable," she declared. "I want to be felt." Graham's dances are open to many interpretations, and like abstract painters, she invites the viewer to bring his or her emotions to the work to complete the picture. She remembers being influenced by Wassily Kandinsky when, as a young woman, she happened to see a painting of his, a slash of red against a field of blue, and decided, "I will dance like that." Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali was a prominent Spanish surrealist painter born in Figueres, Catalonia, on the 11th of May 1904. Dali's father was strict in the education of his children, unlike the mother. Dali had a brother named Salvador who was born 9 months before him and died of gastroenteritis. When he was 5, Dali was taken to his brother's grave and was told that he was his brother's reincarnation. At an early age, Salvador Dali's parents encouraged him to produce highly sophisticated drawings and was sent to drawing school in Figueres, Spain, in 1916. In February 1921, Dali's mother died of breast cancer. Dali was 16 years old. He later said his mother's death was the greatest blow he had experienced in his life. After her death, Dali's father married his deceased wife's sister. Dali did not resent this marriage because he had a great love and respect for his aunt. In 1922, Dali moved to Madrid and studied at the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, where he already drew attention as an eccentric and dandy. He was influenced by several different artistic styles, including metaphysics and cubism. Dali was expelled from the academy in 1926, shortly before his final exams, when he was accused of starting an unrest. Later, Dali visited Paris, where he met Pablo Picasso, whom he revered. Picasso had already heard favorable reports about Dali from Joan Miró, a fellow Catalan who introduced him to many surrealist friends. As he developed his own style over the next few years, Dali made a number of works heavily influenced by Picasso and Miró. In August 1929, Dali met his lifelong and primary muse, inspiration, and future wife Gala. She was a Russian immigrant 10 years his senior. They married in 1934. In addition to inspiring many artworks throughout her life, Gala would act as Dali's business manager. Dali was a skilled draftsman, best known for the striking and bizarre images in his surrealist work. His painterly skills are often attributed to the influence of Renaissance masters. His best-known work, The Persistence of Memory, was completed in August 1931. Dali's expansive artistic repertoire included film, sculpture, and photography, in collaboration with a range of artists in a variety of media. Dali attributed his love of everything that is gilded and excessive, my passion for luxury and my love of Oriental clothes, to an Arab lineage, claiming that his ancestors were descended from the Moors. Dali was highly imaginative, and also enjoyed indulging in unusual and grandiose behavior. His eccentric manner and attention-grabbing public actions sometimes drew more attention than his artwork, to the dismay of those who held his work in high esteem, and to the irritation of his critics. In 1980, at age 76, Dali's health took a catastrophic turn. His right hand trembled terribly, with Parkinson-like symptoms. His near-senile wife allegedly had been dosing him with a dangerous cocktail of unprescribed medicine that damaged his nervous system, thus causing an untimely end to his artistic capacity. His wife Gala died on the 10th of June 1982, at the age of 87. After Gala's death, Dali lost much of his will to live. On the morning of the 23rd of January 1989, while his favorite record of Tristan and Isolde played, Dali died of heart failure at Figueres at the age of 84. Bob Marley. Bob Marley was born on February 6, 1945. He was a Jamaican reggae singer, songwriter, musician, and guitarist who achieved international fame and acclaim. Starting out in 1963 with the group The Wailers, he forged a distinctive songwriting and vocal style that would later resonate with audiences worldwide. After The Wailers disbanded in 1974, Marley pursued a solo career that culminated in the release of the album Exodus in 1977, which established his worldwide reputation and produced his status as one of the world's best-selling artists of all time, with sales of more than 75 million records. Rastafari. Bob Marley was a committed Rastafari, an Abrahamic religion which developed in Jamaica in the 1930s. This religion infused his music with a sense of spirituality. The Rastafari movement was a key element in the development of reggae. As an ardent proponent of Rastafari, Bob Marley took the reggae music out of the socially deprived areas of Jamaica and onto the international music scene. Illness and death. In July 1977, Marley was found to have a type of malignant melanoma under the nail of a toe. Marley turned down his doctor's advice to have his toe amputated, citing his religious beliefs. Despite his illness, he continued touring until his health deteriorated as the cancer had spread throughout his body. He died on the 11th of May 1981 at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Miami, now University of Miami Hospital, at the age of 36. The spread of melanoma to his lungs and brain caused his death. His final words to his son Ziggy were, "Money can't buy life." Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad was a Polish-British writer. He was born on December 3 in 1857. He is regarded as one of the greatest novelists to write in the English language. He was granted British nationality in 1886 but always considered himself a Pole. Though he did not speak English fluently until he was in his 20s, and always with a marked accent, he was a master prose stylist who brought a distinctly non-English sensibility into English literature. He wrote stories and novels, many with a nautical setting, that depict trials of the human spirit in the midst of an impassive, inscrutable universe. Joseph Conrad is considered an early modernist, though his works still contain elements of 19th-century realism. His narrative style and anti-heroic characters have influenced many authors, including T.S. Eliot, William Faulkner, and Graham Greene. Many films have been adapted from, or inspired by, Conrad's works. One of the most famous adaptations of his work is Apocalypse Now, 1979, by Francis Ford Coppola. It was adapted from Heart of Darkness. Writing in the heyday of the British Empire, Conrad drew on his native Poland's national experiences and on his personal experiences in the French and British merchant navies to create short stories and novels that reflect aspects of a European-dominated world, while profoundly exploring human psychology. Appreciated early on by literary critics, his fiction and nonfiction have since been seen as almost prophetic, in the light of subsequent national and international disasters of the 20th and 21st centuries. He died on August 3, 1924. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, also known as Madiba, a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary and politician who served as President of South Africa from 1994 to 1999, was the first black South African to hold the office, and the first elected in a fully representative, multiracial election. Mandela was born to the Thembu royal family. He attended Fort Hare University and the University of Witwatersrand, where he studied law. After the Afrikaner nationalists of the National Party came to power in 1948 and began implementing the policy of apartheid, a system of racial segregation, he rose to prominence in the African National Congress's 1952 defiance campaign. Working as a lawyer, he was repeatedly arrested for seditious activities and, with the ANC leadership, was prosecuted in the treason trial from 1956 to 1961 but was found not guilty. Although initially committed to nonviolent protest, he was arrested in 1962, convicted of sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government, and sentenced to life imprisonment in the Rivonia trial. An international campaign lobbied for his release, which was granted in 1990 after 27 years of imprisonment. Becoming ANC president, Mandela led negotiations with President F.W. de Klerk to abolish apartheid and establish multiracial elections in 1994, in which he led the ANC to victory. He was elected president and formed a government of national unity. As president, he established a new constitution and initiated the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate past human rights abuses, while introducing policies to encourage land reform, combat poverty, and expand healthcare services. Stephen William Hawking. Stephen William Hawking was an English theoretical physicist, cosmologist, author, and director of research at the Centre for Theoretical Cosmology at the University of Cambridge. Hawking was born on January 8, 1942. At an early age, he showed an interest in science and technology. Although known at school as Einstein, Hawking was not initially successful academically. With time, he began to show considerable aptitude for scientific subjects and decided to read mathematics at university. Hawking's father advised him to study medicine, concerned that there were few jobs for mathematics graduates. Hawking disease. At university, Hawking was diagnosed with motor neuron disease, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. He fell into a depression. Though his doctors advised that he continue with his studies, he felt there was little point. His disease progressed more slowly than doctors had predicted. Although Hawking had difficulty walking unsupported, and his speech was almost unintelligible, an initial diagnosis that he had only 2 years to live proved unfounded. With his doctoral advisor's encouragement, he returned to his work. Hawking started developing a reputation for brilliance and brashness when he publicly challenged the work of the noted Yorkshire astronomer, Fred Hoyle, and his student Jayant Narlikar at a lecture in June 1964. Hawking's work. His scientific work included research on the origins and structure of the universe, from the Big Bang to black holes. He revolutionized the field by being the first to set out a theory of cosmology explained by a union of the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. He was a vigorous supporter of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Success. Hawking was a Fellow of the Royal Society, FRS, a lifetime member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the United States. In 2002, Hawking was ranked number 25 in the BBC's poll of the 100 Greatest Britons. He was the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge between 1979 and 2009 and achieved commercial success with works of popular science in which he discusses his own theories and cosmology in general. His book A Brief History of Time appeared on the British Sunday Times bestseller list for a record-breaking 237 weeks. Death. Hawking's illness gradually paralyzed him over the decades. However, even after the loss of his speech, he was still able to communicate through a speech-generating device, initially through the use of a handheld switch, and eventually by using a single cheek muscle. He died on the 14th of March 2018 at the age of 76. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, the American businessman and technology visionary who is best known as the co-founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Apple Inc., was born on February 24, 1955. His parents were two University of Wisconsin graduate students, Joanne Carol Schiebel and Syrian-born Abdul Fettah Jandali. They were both unmarried at the time. Jandali, who was teaching in Wisconsin when Steve was born, said he had no choice but to put the baby up for adoption because his girlfriend's family objected to their relationship. The baby was adopted at birth by Paul Reinhold Jobs and Clara Jobs. Later, when asked about his adoptive parents, Jobs replied emphatically that Paul and Clara Jobs were my parents. He stated in his authorized biography that they were my parents 1000%. Unknown to him, his biological parents would subsequently marry, December 1955, have a second child, novelist Mona Simpson, in 1957, and divorce in 1962. The Jobs family moved from San Francisco to Mountain View, California when Steve was 5 years old. The parents later adopted a daughter, Patty. Paul was a machinist for a company that made lasers and taught his son rudimentary electronics and how to work with his hands. The father showed Steve how to work on electronics in the family garage, demonstrating to his son how to take apart and rebuild electronics such as radios and televisions. As a result, Steve became interested in and developed a hobby of technical tinkering. Clara was an accountant who taught him to read before he went to school. Jobs' youth was riddled with frustrations over formal schooling. At Monte Loma Elementary School in Mountain View, he was a prankster whose fourth-grade teacher needed to bribe him to study. Jobs tested so well, however, that administrators wanted to skip him ahead to high school, a proposal his parents declined. Jobs then attended Cupertino Junior High and Homestead High School in Cupertino, California. During the following years, Jobs met Bill Fernandez and Steve Wozniak, a computer whiz kid. Following high school graduation in 1972, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. Reed was an expensive college which Paul and Clara could ill afford. They were spending much of their life savings on their son's higher education. Jobs dropped out of college after 6 months and spent the next 18 months dropping in on creative classes, including a course on calligraphy. He continued auditing classes at Reed while sleeping on the floor in friends' dorm rooms, returning Coke bottles for food money, and getting weekly free meals at the local Hare Krishna temple. In 1976, Wozniak invented the Apple computer. Jobs, Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne, an electronics industry worker, founded Apple Computer in the garage of Jobs' parents in order to sell it. They received funding from a then semi-retired Intel product marketing manager and engineer Mike Markula. Through Apple, Jobs was widely recognized as a charismatic pioneer of the personal computer revolution and for his influential career in the computer and consumer electronics fields. Jobs also co-founded and served as chief executive of Pixar Animation Studios. He became a member of the board of directors of the Walt Disney Company in 2006, when Disney acquired Pixar. Jobs died at his California home around 3 p.m. on October 5, 2011, due to complications from a relapse of his previously treated pancreatic cancer. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson, the English actor, comedian, and screenwriter, Rowan Sebastian Atkinson, was born on the 6th of January 1955 in Consett, County Durham, England. He is best known for his work on the sitcoms Mr. Bean and Blackadder. Atkinson has been listed in The Observer as one of the 50 funniest actors in British comedy and amongst the top 50 comedians ever, in a 2005 poll of fellow comedians. Atkinson got a master's degree in electrical engineering at the Queen's College, Oxford. While studying at Oxford, Atkinson started writing and performing his first sketches. He first appeared in Oxford reviews at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Later, he started performing in theatre clubs and on comedy shows for BBC Radio 3. He reached success in TV performances such as Not the 9 O'Clock News, Blackadder and The Thin Blue Line, but Atkinson reached worldwide fame by writing and starring the TV sitcom Mr. Bean. Described by Atkinson himself, Mr. Bean is a character that is much like a child in a grown man's body. The series of Mr. Bean has enabled his character to secure a place in the popular culture of several countries. Mr. Bean is a series of 14 25-minute episodes written by and starring Rowan Atkinson. This British situation comedy television program is based on a character originally developed by Atkinson while he was studying for his master's degree at Oxford University. The series features funny situations occurring in the life of Mr. Bean. The latter was described by Atkinson as a child in a grown man's body. Mr. Bean tries to solve various problems presented by everyday tasks and often causes disruption in the process. Bean rarely speaks, and the largely physical humor of the series is derived from his interactions with other people and his unusual solutions to situations. George Orwell. George Orwell, whose real name is Eric Arthur Blair, was an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic. His work is marked by lucid prose, awareness of social injustice, opposition to totalitarianism, and commitment to democratic socialism. Early life. Orwell was born on the 25th of June 1903 in Motihari, Bihar, in British India, where he spent his first days. His mother brought him and his older sister, Marjorie, to England about a year after his birth and settled in Henley-on-Thames. Because his father stayed behind in India and rarely visited, George Orwell and his father never formed a strong bond. Orwell was later sent to a boarding school, which he hated and where he got his first taste of England's class system. On a partial scholarship, Orwell noticed that the school treated the richer students better than the poorer ones. He won scholarships to Wellington College and Eton College to continue his studies. Because his family couldn't pay for his university education, Orwell joined the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, then a British colony. He resigned in 1927 and decided to become a writer. Career. Orwell is well known for his literary criticism, poetry, fiction, and polemical journalism. He has gained worldwide acknowledgement for his dystopian novel 1984 and the allegorical novella Animal Farm. His book Homage to Catalonia, an account of his experiences in the Spanish Civil War, is widely acclaimed, as are his numerous essays on politics, literature, language, and culture. In 2008, The Times ranked him second on a list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. Influence. Orwell's work has had a great impact on popular and political culture. The term Orwellian is an example of this influence. This term describes totalitarian or authoritarian social practices. It has entered the English language together with many other of his neologisms, including Cold War, Big Brother, Thought Police, Room 101, Doublethink, and Thought Crime. Death. Orwell was diagnosed as having tuberculosis in December 1947. Since then, his health continued to decline and he died on the 21st of January, 1950. Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf was an English author, feminist, essayist, publisher, and critic, considered as one of the foremost modernists of the 20th century along with T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, and Gertrude Stein. Her parents were Sir Leslie Stephen, who was a notable historian, author, critic, and mountaineer, and Julia Prinsep Duckworth, a renowned beauty. According to Woolf's memoirs, her most vivid childhood memories were not of London but of St. Ives in Cornwall, where the family spent every summer until 1895. This place inspired her to write one of her masterpieces, To the Lighthouse. The sudden death of her mother in 1895, when Virginia was 13, and that of her half-sister Stella 2 years later, led to the first of Virginia's several nervous breakdowns. But it was the death of her father in 1904 provoked her most alarming collapse and she was briefly institutionalized. Some scholars have suggested that her mental instability was also due to the sexual abuse to which she and her sister Vanessa were subjected by their half-brothers George and Gerald Duckworth. Woolf came to know the founders of the Bloomsbury Group. She became an active member of this literary circle. Later, Virginia Stephen married writer Leonard Woolf on the 10th of August 1912. Despite his low material status, the couple shared a close bond. Virginia's most famous works include the novels Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse in Orlando, and the book-length essay A Room of One's Own, with its famous dictum, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction." In some of her novels, she moves away from the use of plot and structure to employ stream of consciousness to emphasize the psychological aspects of her characters. After completing the manuscript of her last novel, Between the Acts, Woolf fell into a depression similar to that which she had earlier experienced. On the 28th of March 1941, Woolf put on her overcoat, filled its pockets with stones, and walked into the River Ouse near her home and drowned herself. Woolf's body was not found until the 18th of April 1941. Her husband buried her cremated remains under an elm in the garden of Monk's house, their home in Rodamel, Sussex. Her final writing were these words addressed to her husband: "I know that I am spoiling your life, that without me you could work. And you will, I know. You see, I can't even write this properly. I can't read. What I want to say is I owe all the happiness of my life to you. You have been entirely patient with me and incredibly good. I want to say that. Everybody knows it. If anybody could have saved me, it would have been you. Everything has gone from me but the certainty of your goodness. I can't go on spoiling your life any longer. I don't think two people could have been happier than we have been." Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley was an English writer and philosopher. He wrote about 50 books, both fiction and non-fiction works. He also wrote essays, narratives, and poems. His life. Aldous was born on the 26th of July 1894 into the famous Huxley family, whose members are known for excelling in science, medicine, arts, and literature. He graduated from Balliol College, Oxford, with an undergraduate degree in English literature. Early in his career, he published short stories and poetry and edited the literary magazine Oxford Poetry, before going on to publish travel writing, satire, and screenplays. He spent the latter part of his life in the United States, living in Los Angeles from 1937 until his death. By the end of his life, Huxley was widely recognized for being one of the most prominent intellectuals of his time. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature 7 times and was elected Companion of Literature by the Royal Society of Literature in 1962. His works. Huxley was a humanist and pacifist. He grew interested in philosophical mysticism and universalism, addressing these subjects with works such as The Perennial Philosophy, which illustrates commonalities between Western and Eastern mysticism. As far as his literary works, his most famous novel Brave New World has been ranked at number 5 on its list of the 100 best English-language novels of the 20th century by the Modern Library in 1999. Death. Aldous Huxley died of laryngeal cancer on November 22, 1963. Media coverage of Huxley's death was overshadowed by the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy on the same day, less than 7 hours before Huxley's death.